All right. My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Dewey Kelly. It's August 12th, 2024. We're at Ribbon Ridge Vineyard in Newberg. And Dewey, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
First question is why wine?
Why wine? Well, it's a little bit of an indirect story. I grew up as a Southern Baptist in the South, so wine wasn't part of my early childhood, as you might imagine. Came here to go to Lewis and Clark in the late 60s, early 70s. And I had started getting a little bit into wine just from friends, but not very good wine. And then as many Lewis and Clark graduates do in the early 70s, I went to work in restaurants. In the mid-70s, there were more overeducated waiters and dishwashers and cooks in Oregon than you could believe. They were teachers, they were lawyers. So I went to the food background. I was fortunate enough to get into to work at a restaurant called L'Auberge, which is no longer around, but in those days was kind of one of the cool restaurants, one of the first ones that did a multi-course French-oriented dinner. And that was sort of my first introduction in good wines and starting to learn about them, learn different things about them. And one of the waiters at L'Auberge at that time was David Adelsheim, which is kind of a good connection to have early on. So we went through there, I went through that, I went through Genoa, which was another one of the restaurants, and then opened the third restaurant in their chain was the Wood Stove Restaurant in Northwest Portland. And by that time I was doing more managing and less washing dishes and cooking and that stuff. So people would come in to sell wine, and so I got to meet some of the really early winemakers. We're talking about 73. There weren't a lot of them, but one of the guys who kept bringing his box of wines in was Dave Lett. And that's another really nice collection. So we got to know each other, and I started helping him at the winery and doing tastings. So my first crush with him was in 1974. And I was just a cellar rat, like everybody else starts out with. And one of my co-cellar rats was a man named Fred Arterberry. I don't know if you know the name, you know Jimmy now. But so we would kind of wash barrels and drink wine. And I remember one time David and I are out in the vineyard, it's raining, and we're under the eaves of a shed out there overlooking the vineyard, eating tuna fish sandwiches and drinking a 73 Chardonnay from Irie Vineyards. And he was describing the romance of wine as we're in the mud. But that was a pretty good representation of what life in the early days was like. So fairly soon after that, we decided that we wanted to be involved. We really liked all the people that we met. It was a very small community in those days, and everybody knew everybody. So we got to know people and decided that we wanted to be a part of it. But we wanted to be part of it as growers because there were so many good winemakers in Oregon, and I didn't know anything about it. So it was foolish of me to kind of be presumptuous enough to say, I'm going to make a great Oregon Pinot Noir. So about 77, we started looking for a place. And we looked for quite a while, and we came across this place on something called Ribbon Ridge that nobody ever knew about. It was a 640-acre piece that the owner had kind of gifted to George Fox College to subdivide and then get paid for it. So George Fox would get the interest and everything for the 12 years, and then they would get paid off. So that was kind of their endowment, I guess you'd say. So we were the first ones actually to come up and look at this place. And it kind of goes from Patty Green to the other side of Whistling Ridge, all the way to the top of the hill. Fairly amazing piece of property. So we kind of came up this road and we came to this clearing, and we had looked at a lot of pieces of property, and then this one just felt different than everything else. And so we started working on it. It took a year for them to subdivide all the pieces so they could close everything. But in November of '78, we closed on it. And that was actually earlier than that, because we got married up here in, I'm going to say this wrong, May of '78. And we had just closed on it. And we had the wedding up here. We had just put the road in. It was all muddy and clay. And we had 150 people come up here. And we spent the first several hours of our married life pushing cars out of the mud. My parents drove to the bottom of the road. They lived in Florida at the time, turned right, and didn't stop until they got to Bozeman, Montana. Everybody was throwing off all their muddy stuff at the bottom of the road. So a very memorable kind of event. And some of the, we've got a picture of David here that looks like the Gorton's fisherman. He was the only, you could tell who was in the industry, wine side of the industry, because they had rain gear. Nobody else did. And so he was the Gorton's fisherman there out here. And then he gave us a case of his 1975 South Block Pinot Noir as a wedding present, and a 74 Chardonnay as wedding presents. And we didn't really know what we had at the moment, but we learned fairly quickly that we had scored big. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of how we ended up here. In those days, you didn't have to start with $20 million to put a vineyard in, to buy the land. It's appreciated significantly since '78. So Robin and I were both working in restaurants. We were both cooking and managing restaurants. And we could afford to do this. We could afford to buy the land and then start working on our dream that way. When we were deciding about the vineyard, whether this was a good vineyard spot, we had dug a number of septic test holes at various places. And the entire qualification process was which way south, and jumped down into one of the test holes. David Lett, Bill Wayne, and Joel Myers kind of jumped down into this test hole and going, that looks good. So it's like, okay, yeah, well, let's do it. So we signed the papers and kind of got started that way. So, and then, in those days, it was so early '70s, mid '70s. You probably don't remember those years, but we wanted to get back to nature and eke our living out of the soil with our bare hands. And then we got into it a little bit. And then at some point I realized I wanted to drive through a vineyard to get to my house. I didn't really want to stop and take care of everything. So that was a good thing to learn. So we started making plans to plant. And
what did the property look like when you took it over?
a college friend and us split an 87-acre piece, and we have the back 42 acres, and they have the front. So there was a 25-acre field in the middle. Everything else was wooded, and we kind of went. Well, we want the field. We know we had to get 40 acres, so we knew this property line, so we'll go this property line. I want to go to the top of that hill, and I want to come over here. So we kind of just, since we were the first ones here, we kind of mapped out the piece that we wanted. But this 25-acre field was sort of like the cornerstone of the whole idea. So we decided we're going to start planning for the vineyard. So all this time I'm kind of doing crushes with whoever I can do crushes with. We got some Pinot Gris cuttings from Dick Ponzi. And we put them in a nursery out here. I've fenced off a little nursery here and put them in there. And the goal was in spring of '81, we were going to, or spring of '82, we were going to plant them out in the vineyard, create the vineyard. And then in December of '81, I blew out my knee. And in May of 82, thank you, we had a daughter. And so, well, that kind of, I couldn't get on a tractor, and we had a kid. And so that kind of put things off. And then 4 years later, I blew out another knee, and we had another daughter. And so you can kind of tell I've got to stop this somehow or another. But anyway, it just kind of put us off. And all of a sudden, it's 20 years later, because you have kids. And also, we figured out that two of us working in a kitchen were not going to be able to afford to do a vineyard. And at that point, Robin and I were both cooking at a private club called the Racket Club. And Robin was my assistant. And she tells it differently. She tells it that one of us has to go and make money. I tell it that at one point I said something to my assistant cook that I shouldn't have said to my wife. And then I was looking for a day job. So I made the jump from being executive chef at a private club to high tech, being a technical writer in a software company. Paid marginally better at that time, but not significantly. So that was, we kind of picked it up again in about 99, Bryce and Marcia Bagnall bought the parcel over here from our friends, and they had planted. And so now we're thinking, oh, well, we ought to be able to do this again. So we kind of picked up the project again and started clearing. And it really worked out well for us not to have planted in 1980, because we would have done everything wrong. We would have been own-rooted on 8-foot rows, 900 plants to an acre or something like that. And in the intervening years, people up here learned how to grow grapes. And they were very generous in sharing their knowledge. So we got the benefit of that. And in 2001, we planted the first 9 acres, which is the mature vineyard that's right behind us. So that's going along. And then I'm doing a lot of traveling in my high-tech side of thing. I've switched over to doing marketing for high-tech. I'm doing international marketing, so I'm traveling a lot. In fact, when we were trying to decide what to plant, I had a conference in Geneva for a couple of weeks, and then Robin came over and we went through Burgundy, and we would taste the grapes off the vine in this September because they can't pick everything. They can only pick what the government says they can pick. And then have that wine for dinner that night. And then we would just kind of work our way, spent 2 weeks working our way through Burgundy, trying to decide what characteristics we wanted in our wine. And we came to, we really liked the Pomards from around the Pomard area, that juicy, kind of black fruit, kind of succulent, sexy kind of a base to it. And then we also like some of the new Dijon clones from around Beaune. So that was what we kind of said, well, if we can make a wine that has this nice, juicy foundation with the bright notes on top of it, that's what we should do. And so when we planted, we put, the vineyard it rolls a bit. So we planted Pomard on anything that was west-facing or south-facing, and the 777 on anything that was north-facing or east-facing. The idea is that 777 ripens more quickly, and then everything will ripen at the same time, and that'll be fine. So, and all along this, I've been kind of studying wine. One of my early friends that through a roundabout way I met while I was at the Wood Stove was Cameron Nagel, and I don't know if you know him, but he had Northwest Palate. So he and I kind of undertook a multi-year self-training exercise. We would split cases, and then we would talk about them, and then we would buy another case, and it was a good learning exercise. And sometimes we were right in buying that one, and sometimes we weren't, but it was a learning experience. In 2002, I was actually commuting to Auckland, New Zealand. So I'd spend 2 weeks every other month down there and then coming back. And in those days, you could, before the 9/11 stuff, I had between my carry-on and my suitcase, I could take 18 bottles of Oregon wine down to New Zealand and bring 18 bottles back. And it's really easy to trade wine with another winemaker. And so we started learning more and more about it. Unfortunately, in 2002 was the dot-com bubble, and I was kind of working offshore, so I ended up having some spare time that year. And that was the year that Bryce was starting, in 2002, he started producing at Carlton Winemaker Studio. So I was able to go into Carlton Winemaker Studio and hang out, volunteer. The ratio seemed to be one punch down would be good for 3 stupid questions. And I had my quota. But everybody was so great there. And there were some really, really good winemakers in those days up there. So we're kind of learning about it. I'm still not thinking I'm going to make wine. I'm still going to sell the wine. And then we were going to have a crop in 2003. When we planted the vineyard, we did a close, 1,400 acre plants per acre. We put in drip irrigation. So the development was really good. We had maybe a 2% loss in the first year. And so everything was producing really. So we knew we would get a limited crop in 2003. So we had to figure out how to make wine at that point, how it was going to get made. So 2002 was an interesting vintage because it kind of had 2 peaks. And there was a kind of a peak that came in earlier, and I had worked all the way through that crush at Carlton Winemaker Studio. And then a little bit later, there was another crop coming in, depending on where you were. So we bought a ton of Pinot Noir from Chehalem. and then another from Coral Creek, and then another ton of Pinot Gris from someplace down further south. And talked a friend of ours into letting us set up a winery in his barn, very rudimentary wine. We were going to make 2 tons of wine, and just to see what it was like. And so we somehow managed to get it made, entered in the state fair, and won a medal. And at the same time, I'm realizing there's nobody I can get to make wine for us as cheaply as I work, because I'm not sure any winemaker you've ever talked to is drawing a salary. So I thought, well, crap, I'm going to have to make the wine at least this first year. So we got 600 pounds an acre off of the vineyard in 2003. And made it at Carlton Winemaker Studio. We were licensed at that point and had our license there as an alternating premises winery. In those days, you could just send wine to Spectator. Now you have to apply to have them taste and everything. So that came out, and I got 91 points on the first wine out of the chute. First one off the vineyard, first wine I had made. And I'm going, oh, crap, I'm going to have to be the winemaker. So then I was the winemaker, and but there's probably no better place than Carlton Winemaker Studio in those days to learn what you're doing, because there's 7 winemakers, all really good, and they've seen everything. I haven't seen anything. So we would constantly be going, can I borrow your nose? You know, I know something's going on here. I don't know what it is. And they would kind of walk me through it, and it worked out really well. So we made wines there from 2003 to 2008, and kind of getting the hang of it. At this point, we're up to kind of full production on the vineyard. We're starting to see the evolution of the vineyard as the roots are getting down into the sandstone. They're starting to pick up a little bit more mature characteristics, a little more minerality, and a little more of the brambly thing that you get off of Ribbon Ridge. So we were pretty excited about it, and we're also really excited about this whole new AVA thing that was going on. There was kind of had a Willamette when they were talking about some sub-AVAs. So we kind of formed an informal group up here. And then Doug Tennell and Harry Peterson-Nedry and I put together the application for the AVA. It took a while to get it approved because when 9/11 kind of came around, they shifted all the people that were reviewing AVA applications to be Homeland security agents. And so it just took a while to kind of get it through the system. But by the time we were bottling our 2003, we could actually use Ribbon Ridge AVA on the label. And now it's pretty exciting. There was a little bit of discussion as we were forming this organization as to why I got to use Ribbon Ridge as a brand name and nobody else could. And we had actually registered the DBA in 1980 when we thought we were going to make wine. And we ended up not making wine, but to protect the label, the brand, we made Oregon wine jelly. So we would buy 55-gallon drums of wine from Sokolblosser and make wine. We'd make a Pinot Noir and a Merlot and a Riesling, and then a Riesling Mint and a Strawberry Riesling. And we were doing pretty well with it. I think we were in 17 states, distribution. And then it just got to be too much for us. So if you're interested, I still have some 30-year-old Pinot Noir jelly. but you're welcome to. And it surprisingly is good. It ages, and I was kind of, when we were doing that whole jelly thing, was when I was kind of getting more advanced in the cooking, and I did some pastry work at La Varenne in Paris. So we kind of had this whole figuring out the wine and figuring out croissants. And it was kind of this back and forth. And it was actually, I'd love to go back and do that again. It's a little hard to go back to it. But yeah, it was, so here's where you have to reset me, because I'm back, I just jumped back 6 years. But but one of the things that I found in the winemaking was my cooking background was really helpful in the winemaking, because in both of them, you're sort of using a formula, but then you're looking for cues, and you have to pick up those cues and know what to do about them. And it's the same in both of them. It's just different cues and different solutions. And so mentally, I was geared for that. And so we would, at the beginning of prior to harvest, we would go through some fairly intensive training on faults and identifying, I can, at this level I can perceive it, and this level I can identify it. And and there's, half a dozen or so that you really need to be able to pick up in that early phase. And I was able to do that because of that cooking correlation. So, and if I didn't know, somebody in the building did. They got tired of me after a while, but it was, they're still patient with me. But I also feed them well when they give me good ideas. So we kind of bounced around. I left the studio in 2008, and then went to, I worked for the next, from 2009 to 2014 at Bodecker Cellars in Northwest Portland, because Stuart and Athena had been at the studio while we were there, and then they went and started their own place. So I went down there for a while, and then I was selling most of our fruit. I kept a few acres. The top of the ridge there is what we call the wedding block, because that's where we got married. And I've always kept that 2-acre block for my wines. And we label our reserve as a wedding block reserve. So I've always kept that block, and then depending on who else was buying fruit, I would take more or less. But in those days, Andrew Rich was buying fruit, Scott Paul was buying fruit. Other people were, so Panther Creek bought 1 year, and Willamette Valley bought 1 year, and can't remember who else, but Scott and Andrew were sort of like the hardcore group. And every year, in between the time, after malolactic fermentation and before we sulfured everything down, we would all get together and we would taste. And we knew which block and which rows each one went, and we could say, this is the oak I used, this was fermented naturally, this was inoculated. And we could it was just this great learning experience. I always liked mine better, but that's not relevant, I guess. I'd be surprised not to. So then we kind of bounced around, and we had some really nice wines and really good vintages, and we had some really difficult ones. We had The cool years, we had a few cool years, then 7 and 11, or 7, 10, and 11, they didn't come out right away. They were difficult wines to make, and they just took a long time to develop. And almost all of them, the next year was a really good year, and so you couldn't sell an 07 because the 08s were so good, and you couldn't sell an 11 because the 12s were so good. And so they got bad press right off the bat. Then over the years, we're still selling our 2011, and it is tasting really good. So it's hard to know what the rule of thumb is. 2009, we lost probably 75% of our buds to frost, an early frost. And then, so we basically all have decided, well, we write off the vineyard. And then a couple of weeks later, the secondaries start budding, and those start developing. And it was a year with a couple of really hot peaks. And because our vineyard, our grapes were like 2 weeks behind everything, we missed those spikes. So we didn't get the big heat. We were behind, we were just kind of lagging behind to it. And as it worked out, 2009 was one of our favorite years. We made we were getting 92s and 93s on those wines that we didn't think. But about August, I'm going, I better find some barrels because we're going to actually have to make wine this year. So what they didn't tell you in the brochure is that this is farming. It's you think it's lifestyle, you think it's something else, but it's farming. And I have trouble with houseplants. So we right away decided that we needed to get professional management on the vineyard. And so we worked with Advanced Vineyard System from planting the vineyard for a number of years, and then we moved over to Results Partners. But we had one vineyard manager that worked our vineyard for 9 years, and he knew everything, and we trusted him completely. The only run-in really we had was there was a point when I was forbidden to drive the tractor down the rows again. 6-foot rows, 5-foot tractor, long row, and about halfway down the row, I'm off in the Bahamas someplace. And it ended up being cheaper to hire somebody to do the tractor work than to fix the stuff I broke. And so by mutual agreement, I would find something else to do. So I would do estate work, get my tractor work in that way, but not there. And I was okay with that. I don't know how people do that. They just, I'm going to stay here, we're not going to change anything, and we're going to drive a quarter of a mile down this road and not veer left or right. And hills are going, so I let those guys do that. So.
Tell me how the vineyard has developed. You mentioned as it started getting roots, you started to get its characteristics. Tell me the characteristics of the grapes here. What is the terroir here for you, and how have you seen it evolve?
Profile-wise, it's still fairly similar, but it's just kind of more of it, more intensity, and more of a foundation and more consistency as they're getting down. They're a little bit less dependent on the amount of water they get. The water, we almost never use the irrigation any longer, but because they're down, so they're managing their own water a little bit better, so you don't have those peaks and valleys. We found that we started out believing 2 tons an acre was what you got, and that's what you should get. We this vineyard does 3 tons an acre really well. And it took us a while to creep up to that because it wasn't really, it wasn't done. And it ripens really well at 3 tons an acre. We're finding the difference between the Pomard and the 777 is a little bit more noticeable now. And so in the winery, there's a little bit more to work with in terms of putting your blends together. I've always kind of viewed blending as, I still think winemaking is magic. I don't really understand how it works yet. But I always look at it like you're building a chord. And as you're tasting these different barrels, you figure out what notes you have and what notes you need. We keep all of the sections of the vineyards, all the clones separate through the barrel aging. And then at the end, all of our different wines we make are barrel selections. So I will sit and we have some friends that taste with us, and we'll all make our notes. Then I go off and put my blends together. And it's always interesting, and we're getting better at it. We can kind of project what we're going to do now, whereas, when we had 8 barrels, it took me, 30 different combinations to get those 8 barrels, and ended up putting everything in one barrel. So in 15, I made 5 wines because we had really good fruit. And we did our estate, which is kind of our standard wine. We wanted a wine that we could serve, market to wine bars. So something that didn't have to sit on the shelf for 3 years before you could drink it. We made that. We made our first rosé. We made a reserve that year, and we made a single clone 777. And it was all just trying to put these different barrels together. I think we had 30 barrels, which is like nothing for most people, but for us it was like a massive amount. Took everybody's notes, and I had a business trip, and so I actually sketched out the blends on the plane and said, these barrels go here. And I came back and we put them together, and I think I changed 2 barrels. But I think that's, the key. I think I know the fruit a lot better now. We're small, but the advantage I have is that I've been making wine from the same plants for 20 years. And so it's really, I know these really well. I know the characteristics. I know what I'm going to get from this block and that block. And that makes it a lot more fun. I used to go in there and just be kind of intimidated by, what am I going to do? Am I going to have anything? And now I'm pretty comfortable doing that. The thing that really, if I go to look at my regrets on all of this stuff, my biggest regret is that I wasn't able to move out here. So one of the reasons I got into this was because of the people. And now I'm a commuter out here. And so I think the informal get-togethers and the community that all engenders is something that I really miss. We know everybody, we're good friends with everybody, but they're not neighbors. Like, we don't see them every day. And so I think that is something that we kind of had missed by not living out here. For a long time, we couldn't build out here. When we first bought, we could have built. But we didn't put a septic in, so when the zoning changed, we couldn't build any longer. And then it just took us, there was a metal measure 47 or 43 or whatever it was to change the zoning laws, but we couldn't really support that even though it would help us. And so finally we had established enough of a business record that we could apply to the county and get a building site. In the meantime, we built a porch. And so this is kind of where we can hang out. It's, you know, we live 25 miles away. We can get out here. We put our wood-fired oven in here. We invite people out, and gradually we've added some things to it. But I'm not sure we spent a dime on anything other than grapes and wine for 10 years. Because we didn't have more than it, you know. But unless it went into the bottle or went into that, we just couldn't afford it at those days. We have a couple of partners that have been with us forever. I mean, ever since we planted, and but we've never really gone outside of that small group. We've just kind of kept it in the family, I guess. So in that regards, I think we're a much different kind of operation. You know, we'll make, you know, maybe we'll, so in 2020, in 23, I'll make 325 cases. And that's, you know, that's like spit bucket quantities for most places. But it's our entire production, and it doesn't totally happen, but our goal is we want to hand the bottle of wine to the person that's going to pour it, and that's been really good for us. You know, we don't have any distributors. We don't have really any wholesale accounts. It's mostly wine club and website and word of mouth. So a little different business model than most, but it's worked for us. Such as it is since we both maintained our day jobs. I didn't retire from my day job until 2019. So for all of those years, I had a full-time job and was doing this on the side. Although you can't do it on the side, it tells you when it needs you. But working them, fitting them both in. I did have to switch when we started making wine. I had to switch companies to a company that was more domestic. I couldn't do the international traveling anymore, which I kind of missed, but I just couldn't be gone that long. And now it's kind of, we'll see what happens at this point. Our kids are not going to take this over. They've seen how much work it is. So they're doing other things. So, you know, we're slowly transitioning the vineyard over to Amir. He's going to take the vineyard operations. And in the last couple of years, we've now planted another 6 acres last year and the year before. So now we're up to 15 acres, and we're looking at putting a winery in here or someplace. But that's sort of like the next evolution. And I would be okay with making the transition from a winemaker to a wine consumer. You know, because it's like, yeah, this old crotchety guy sitting on his rocking chair on the front porch sipping a wine that I made 20 years ago. I could do that.
That sounds pretty good.
So we'll see what happens coming down. So
you talked about the sort of the growth of your winemaking in terms of the intimidation factor, feeling like you walked in knowing what you're doing. Tell me how the wines have evolved and how your approach has evolved along with that.
The first thing is that I've added a little. So we're now making for the last, we've made now 4 white Pinot Noirs, and that was kind of an innovation for us. We had when I was working at Bodecker, I started making there because I had early on I was making Pinot Gris and early Muscat. In the early years, and then when we moved, it didn't have the barrels anymore, and so for the whole time we were at Bodecker's, we didn't really make a white wine. And then when we got to Scott Paul, one of our friends bought me 2 tanks, so I could make a white wine. And then we weren't sure what we were going to make, so we had a block of the Dijon 777 here that we wanted, and I didn't want to make, all the standard ones. I wanted something that was a little different. So we decided, is it even possible to make a white Pinot Noir? Because there just weren't very many of them, and there are fewer good ones. So we gave it a shot, and it was nerve-wracking. So that's a total new in it. And then the same with the rosé. Our rosé is different than most rosés. We use a Saunier method, so we're just pulling. It's the same wine that goes into the same juice that goes into our other wines, but we just pull it out after 12 hours and then make the rosé from that. So those are kind of new things that we've done. The rest of the winemaking is, I think, really consistent. It took me maybe 3 or 4 years to figure out the barrels that went well with this wine. And so that was a big, but then I've kind of kept that consistent. I only use 25 to 35% new oak as much as anything, because it sort of depends on the exchange rate and how many barrels I can afford that year. But, that's pretty much dialed in. I've only inoculated 2 years, 13, which was just a disaster for most people. But we knew we'd been making wine 10 years at that point. And we knew that you can't make a good wine from unripe grapes. And so we kind of hung in there. We ended up throwing away about 1/3 of our fruit because it was just either never made it into the picking bin or sorted out on the sort table. Hardest wine I've ever had to make because the chemistry's off. Everything it's a beautiful wine, and maybe one that I'm most pleased with. But I think in terms of, I'm a little bit more confident reacting to things. But I always start out planning to follow the same procedure. I kept really good logs about what I did and what I saw and what happened, and that's really been beneficial. So I can look at the acids came in at this level, and I added this acid to it, and it ended up here. So I can go back and I have that experience because I'm working with the same plants year after year. And so tasting through our wines is really interesting because you're tasting the vintage. It's the year, that year was this way, so that's what causes this wine to look this way. And so to me, that's kind of why we got into winemaking. I didn't want to make the same wine every year. I wanted to basically, going back to eking my living out of the soil and trying not to screw it up.
So you talked about meeting some of the people you met early on, David Adelsheim, David Lett, etc., and being attracted to the industry because of people like that. So tell me about, in the early days, what was the industry like? What were the wines like, and what were sort of the things that were attractive to you about becoming part of it?
First of all, there just weren't that many people. And I really liked the camaraderie. you think, well, let's see, Dickie Rath and Dave Leder are probably competitors there. But I sat with him, drinking wine and talking about, or, if I need this, I can get it from there. That whole everybody helping everybody thing. So that kind of attitude is something that that really appealed to me. So I sort of think that the way I make wine is really similar to the way we made wine back then. I think my 2014 is a really good representation of an old style Oregon Pinot Noir. It's not big, but it's complex and good color. It's just it's a really honest, straightforward wine, and I love that about that wine. And I think that's kind of what I look at back in those days. It was nobody was cocky about it. Everybody was confident, but they weren't cocky about it, and they weren't trying to hide anything from anybody else. So I think that is something that really appealed to me, that you can get into a community where you're not constantly competing with each other, even though you're competitors. On a one-to-one basis, you're not competing with each other. But yeah, so I think that's kind of the thing that I really like. Robin couldn't be here, but Robin is, my partner in all of this stuff. But we do different sides of the thing. She's the artist, so all of the labels, the artwork on all of the labels, she painted, except for one. We did our first rosé. We called it Haley Rose. My granddaughter is Haley, and so we called it Haley Rose. And she did the artwork for that label while she was in kindergarten, and we still use it. She still asks for residuals. And then we did I have a grandson named Will, so we did a Willful Pinot Noir. And then we have a grandson named Cameron, so we did a Cameo wine. Early on, we did a Cuvée M, because my daughter Melissa was marrying Michael, and she decided that if I made the wine for the wedding, it wouldn't cost us anything. I says, well, that's not quite how it works, but yes, dear. And then she took it one step further and says, oh, by the way, I need you to make a signature cocktail for the reception, and it has to match the bridesmaids' dresses. So, okay, now you're pushing it. But we did, when you when you press early Muscat, you end up with this, the pulp is really juicy. And so we took that pulp and we added yeast to it and water and fermented it, re-fermented it, and then distilled that into a grappa, and then infused that grappa with raspberries to match the dresses, and then just served it with sparkling wine. So, okay, there.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah. So, but it didn't cost us anything. That's at least that's the good part.
Tell me about the neighborhood when you moved in here, or when you bought this property. What was here? What did it look like? And what sort of was the evolution of it?
Well, when we bought it, we were the first people to buy in this 640-acre piece. And then the only other, there was a vineyard up on, maybe it was a Chehalem Mountain Vineyard, or that was an old, I can't remember who it was, at Erath or somebody had a vineyard up there. Harry Peterson Nedry was starting to get active up on top of the hill. Nobody else was really up here. Everybody was in, the Dundee Hills, but this AVA was really it was unknown territory. And we managed to be here at the right time, at the right place, and there was nothing. But then, gradually, so there used to be 3 parcels between us and Beaufrere's. His upper terrace is just the top of those hills. So in those intervening years, he's bought the properties between us. And Sequitur is kind of the in-between place. And we went up, our property goes up to the top of the hill, and then it was just like forest. There was nothing up there, and now that's pretty well dotted with vineyards. It's really matured. What we haven't seen up here that we've seen in some of the areas, we haven't seen huge influxes of foreign money in here. I mean, there are people that came from elsewhere, or people have sold to somebody. Mike sells Beaufrere's, Patty Green changes. It's Autumn Wind, when we first came in, was there. But it's still, our AVA meetings are always really entertaining. Not the least of which is the assortment of bottles on the bar where everybody brings a bottle. It's always hard to get the meeting started because there's 20 bottles of wine up there. And then the neighborhood, we used to have a paella party up here, and we did it for 15, 16 years. And we would do the paella, and then people would bring other things. And there was a wine table that people would bring bottles of wine, and we'd have some under the table so we could fill in. But one of my favorite images from one of those parties was Mike Etzel rinsing his glass with a magnum of Beaufrere's so he could try this unlabeled bottle that somebody had brought. Okay, well, that tells you a lot about how seriously people take themselves. So that's something. So it's just a good. I do regret not having had kind of grown up with these people, but we're starting to make. We know the Steins really well. We knew Eminent Domain from a long time ago. Doug Tennell and I actually went to college together. So it's we're kind of catching up, but I think there needs to be a communal porch with a bunch of rocking chairs that all of us can kind of sit on the rocking chairs and remember the good old days.
And the wine table is never empty.
Never empty. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think you could pull that off.
I don't even know if we could just line up rocking chairs here, and I don't think anybody would complain. So, yeah. So this is where, this isn't your traditional multi-million-dollar tasting facility, but people really, it feels right. And that's kind of why we bought it in the first place. It's very emblematic of us. It seemed like a very authentic kind of thing, and we really think it's a throwback when we first did our tastings, it was let's move the tractor out of the barn and set up a folding table, see if anybody shows up. And it's still kind of that way, but I don't know if we would have it any other way.
Talk about the future a little bit. You obviously mentioned transitioning time here. What's on your horizon? What are you looking forward to in the future?
I don't really know. We've been, I retired from my day job in 2019. Robin retired in 2017. She ended up being the executive chef at the Racquet Club for 35 years once she kicked me out. So it's, when we started, I was told I needed an exit strategy. And so my exit strategy was having more wine than I could drink the rest of my life. And we're pretty much there. So I don't know what else there is really to accomplish. We've got 23s in the barrel. I may or may not make a 24. There's a lot of trips we want to make. A lot of other things we want to do. When I got out of Lewis and Clark, one of my stated goals was to change careers every 10 years. And, I worked 10 years as a chef and in restaurant management. I worked 10 years actually more like 20 years in high tech, but in different functions, from a technical one to a marketing and international marketing. I've been doing this for a while. And I'm not quite sure what the next thing is. And that's kind of the interesting thing, is trying to figure out what's next and what keeps you interested. I don't want to say I've been there, done that, because that's not really what it is. It's just there's something else out there that I want to try to do, and I'm not sure what it is. Robin hasn't told me yet.
You'll be in your rocking chair until that happens, right?
She has voice and opinion about at what point I should stop making wine, and she's getting to be persuasive. So we'll see. I feel the vineyard is in really good hands. Amir has been with me since the very beginning, since we planted in 2000, and he knows it really well. And when we found out that we came to the realization that our kids were not going to take it over, we started thinking about exit strategy on the vineyard side, because it's a fairly significant asset. And so Jeff Meter had made us an offer for the vineyard to just, add it kind of to his vineyard supply. And then I told my partners about it, and Amir said, "Don't sell it to him. We'll buy it," because I've probably looked at 10 properties over the years with him, wanting to build the full-time home, where all the grandkids are going to go. This is going to be their estate forever. And we have a informal agreement that I can do what I do up here for as long as I want to. I have my wood-fired oven, my Argentinian grill, my wood smoker. We have a lot of stuff we like to do up here. And if we can do it for fun, then that's something. So.
All right, last question for you. Proudest achievement or biggest accomplishment? What makes you proudest as you look back?
I think probably still being here. You see a lot of people come and go, with more talent and money than I have, and we've managed to kind of stay here and be true to what we wanted to do. And the sort of the biggest compliment somebody coming out here can pay us really is, this just feels good. It feels like the right place, the right stuff, and I think that's really, if we had a legacy other than a bunch of wine that I have to drink, it would be, between this experience up here and the people that still talk about throwing their muddy shoes off at the bottom of the hill after our wedding, those are kind of the bookends, I think.
It's fantastic. All the questions that I have for you, anything I didn't ask that I should have, or anything we didn't cover here today that you'd like to cover?
Only you should look at Robin's artwork on the labels.
For sure.
So I set some up down here, and the actual paintings are down in the barn, like hanging in the barn. It's like this art studio. It's like, what? So, but anyway, she, when we did the Pearl, the white Pinot Noir we call Pearl, because because of my food background, all of our wines are really geared towards food. We're fond of saying, if you're not eating food with wine, you should drink scotch. And we sort of feel that way. But when I was getting ready to do this one, I'm going...
Hold it up.
Oh, when I'm doing this one, it's like,
It's beautiful.
Robin, I'm bottling this wine in 2 weeks. I need the picture. So I told her what I wanted, and she did it in a weekend. And I do love this one. It's just, we had, in my mind, there wasn't a good wine to eat with Cajun fried oysters. Because a lot of my background is in Southern cooking and Cajun cooking, Creole. I taught Cajun and Creole cooking for 15 years or so. But this is the wine. And this is Haley's, Haley Rose. Haley did this when she was in kindergarten.
It's pretty cool.
It is pretty cool. I did get in a little trouble sending a bottle with her to show and tell the next year, but they understood. I think they confiscated it. The teacher confiscated it, but it was okay. So I love that. I do love that label. And now she's 19. It's like, how'd that even happen? But most of the Pinots are kind of based on this. Originally, we did a Pinot Noir, an early Muscat, and a Pinot Gris. And so she did those three paintings. And then, of course, we had to do the Cuvée M for my daughter's wedding. And then the Pearl. So it's, these mean a lot. Just that's really kind of part of us. And it's, she is the executive chef, makes the best wood-fired pizza you've ever had.
Thank you so much for taking the time to share your story with us today, sharing the art, sharing the vineyard and all in this great space. Appreciate you taking the time, and we'll let you off the hook.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.